I'm Dave Anderson. In this video, I'll explain the supply curve. The supply curve shows the quantity of a good that producers would supply at various prices.
In the demand video, we discussed the demand for wool sweaters. Now let's examine their supply. Suppose the Sweater Pros company is among many sweater makers in the wool sweater industry, and for simplicity, assume that all wool sweaters are alike. As Sweater Pros makes more and more sweaters, the cost of making another sweater increases. This is in part because as more workers are hired to increase output, congestion and redundancy cause a decrease in worker productivity, and with lower productivity, it is more costly to make another sweater. Later in the course, you'll learn more about why the additional cost of making one more of something, known as the marginal cost, tends to rise. Suppose this graph shows the additional or marginal cost per sweater for any given day. If the price were $35 per sweater, Sweater Pros would supply 4 sweaters because the rest would cost more to make than the price. If the price were $75, how many do you think they would supply? They would supply 6. So this curve along the tops of these bars indicates the quantity of sweaters they would supply at each price. This is their supply curve. We go down from the intersection of the price line to the quantity axis to learn the quantity supplied at a particular price. Most markets have many firms. The market supply curve is found by adding the quantity supplied by all of the firms at each price. Suppose that the Sweater Pros company and the Woolly Worm company are the only sweater makers in a small sweater market. Woolly Worm's supply curve looks like this. The market supply curve is found by adding the quantity Sweater Pros would supply to the quantity Woolly Worm would supply at each price. For example, at a price of $35, Sweater Pros would supply 4 and Woolly Worm would supply 1, so the quantity supplied in the market would be 5. At a price of $75, Sweater Pros would supply 6 and Woolly Worm would supply 2, so the quantity supplied in the market would be 8. Most supply curves are drawn as smooth lines because most markets involve so many units that the flat section representing each unit is tiny and the curve appears smooth. Knowing that the height of the supply curve represents the cost of making each unit makes it easy to understand what makes the supply curve shift. Supply increases when the cost of making each unit decreases. Depending on the context, it may be easier to think of an increase in supply as a downward shift or a rightward shift. It's a downward shift because the cost of making each unit falls. It's a rightward shift because with the lower production costs, firms would produce more for any given price. Either way, it's an increase in supply. Price changes cause a movement along the supply curve, which is simply a change in the quantity supplied. What causes the supply curve to shift? To answer that question, think about what changes the cost of making each unit. One supply shifter is the price of an input, such as the wool used to make wool sweaters. If the price of an input decreases, supply increases. Some things can be made into more than one good. For example, wool can be used to make sweaters or socks, so these goods are substitutes in production. Suppose the price of a substitute in production decreases. If the price of wool socks decreases, more wool will be available to make sweaters, making it less expensive to make sweaters and increasing their supply. Complements in production are goods that are produced together, such as sheepskins and sheep meat or mutton. If more sheepskins are produced, more mutton is available. So if an increase in demand raises the price of sheepskins, the resulting increase in sheepskin production will increase the availability of mutton. That is, if the price of a complement in production increases, the supply of the good increases. Technology that decreases the cost of production, such as knitting machines that lower the cost of sweater production, will increase the supply. If the price is expected to fall in the future, firms will want to supply more now before the price drops. And we saw how the supply curve for a market is the horizontal sum of the supply curve for each firm. So if more firms enter the market, supply increases. Here's a summary of the changes that increase supply. Supply decreases, meaning that the supply curve shifts upward and to the left if the opposite of any of these changes occurs. If you remember that the height of a supply curve is determined by the cost of producing each unit, the shape and shifters of the supply curve will make a lot more sense.